It's been a minute, so let's do another question makeover. This one was on LinkedIn. It's like one of their social poll survey options, but of note, it was done by the company Qualtrics. If you don't know Qualtrics is kind of a big deal in the survey industry. And full disclosure, Qualtrics is actually my favorite survey platform by far. I've been using it since I was in graduate school, so I think I did my first Qualtrics survey in 2012, so for over 10 years, and obsessed, love Qualtrics. Do not love this question though. When was the last time you were asked about your well-being at work? Within the last week? Within the last month? Within the last quarter? Probably a year or more. First things first, great survey questions that get you good data are specific. When was the last time you were asked about your well-being at work is not specific. Do you care if my coworkers ask me? Do you care if my coworkers who are also my friends ask me? Do you care if someone who's my supervisor in a leadership position asked me? That would be helpful context. But also, what does it mean to get asked about your well-being? If I came in and someone was like, hey Kirsten, how are you doing today? Should I count that? Or do you only want me thinking about it if there was a formal survey to ask me about my well-being, or a sit down with someone where they asked me about my well-being? We don't know because you didn't tell me. You didn't give me enough directions to properly contextualize what I should be thinking of in answering this question. So these 1,466 people who voted, what the heck were they thinking of when they answered this? No idea. And if you have no idea about what people were thinking about when they answered your question, it's definitely not a good question. Let's also take a little peek at these answer categories. We've talked about this before, probably we'll talk about it again. You don't want your answer categories to overlap. What do I mean overlap? I mean, none of these should, in this case, we're talking about time, should cover the same period of time. For instance, if I were to click within the last week is also within the last month, which is also within the last quarter. I could see someone being well, it doesn't matter because people will just pick the closest one. If it was last week, you would click in the last week, not within the last quarter, even though technically both of those things are true. I don't even want to leave room for that. Just don't have overlapping answer categories. Then you also are jumping from the last quarter. And so if you divide the year into quarters, that would be the last 3 months, to a year or more. What about, where do all the people who are in between there, where do they go? What answer do they choose? Also, what if this has never happened? Where is the never answer, right? You always want your answer categories to cover the full span of options. So from 0 to infinity, and then also not overlap. So I was thinking about how I would rewrite this, and I was gosh, this is actually kind of complicated to think about. And I'm curious, why does Qualtrics want to know the last time someone asked you? I think if I was to go through this type of questioning, I would actually just ask how often does a coworker ask you about your well-being at work? And then you can have answers never, every day, about once a week, a few times a month, right? You could build out categories based on the frequency, how often you get asked about your well-being at work. You would have to define what it means to be asked about your well-being. So you might put in parentheses for example, they ask you how your day is going, right? Or if this was going the more formal route, you might say how often does leadership survey you about your well-being, right? You can see there are infinite possibilities here for how you could structure this question and rewrite it to be a better question, but they all depend on what the heck is it that Qualtrics in this case wants to learn from this question. In summary, I think this is a bad question. I don't think it's getting Qualtrics good data, and it's really disappointing to see such a large player in the survey industry put out an example of a bad question. If you're gonna put questions, even just on your social media, Qualtrics, it should be a good question that someone else could take and use, because you are technically a survey expert platform. So what are we doing? Modeling bad survey practices.